In this video, I want to talk about the anatomy of the kidneys. When we're talking about the urinary system, we'll be spending most of our time discussing the kidney because that's where all of the physiologically cool stuff happens in the urinary system. The ureters and the urethra and the bladder are all important in the excretion of urine, but the kidney is where urine is actually made and where all of the homeostatic mechanisms that the urinary system is responsible for, where those happen. So maintenance of correct ion concentrations, maintenance of blood fluid balance, and acid-base balance. That all happens during urine formation in the kidneys. So the first part of discussing the anatomy of the kidney is talking about where the kidneys are located. You probably know that you have two kidneys. They're located roughly in the middle of your back. They're actually slightly protected by your lowest ribs, but there's really not a whole lot of protection for the kidneys. That's why if someone punches you or kicks you in the lower back, it can damage your kidneys and it can be excruciatingly painful. The kidneys are located in your abdominal cavity, but they're referred to as retroperitoneal. That means that they're actually located behind the serous membrane of the abdominal cavity, the peritoneum. So when you think retro, you think kind of retro in the past, behind. So retroperitoneal is behind the peritoneum. This diagram here shows what that means. The anterior surface of the kidneys are covered in peritoneum, but the posterior surface of the kidneys aren't. This is a cadaver view of the kidneys showing their relationship to the major blood vessels of the abdominal cavity. You have the inferior vena cava here and the abdominal aorta there. Notice you can see the extensive, heavy, wide blood vessels going straight to the kidney. There. This also shows the relationship of the kidneys to the ureters and the bladder. So there's the bladder down there, and the ureters, which are highlighted in this section, where the inferior vena cava has been removed, making them a little bit easier to see. The kidneys themselves are roughly bean-shaped. If you've ever wondered why kidney beans are called kidney beans, now you know, although I think it has something to do with the color as well. Each kidney has an adrenal gland sitting on top of it, like a little hat. So there's a right adrenal gland on top of the right kidney and a left adrenal gland on top of the left kidney. There is, on the inner curve of the kidney, there's a cleft called the hilum that leads into the renal sinus. And this hilum is where all sorts of tubes go in and out of the kidney. This is where lymphatic vessels and nerves and blood vessels and the ureters come into contact with the kidney. There are multiple layers of connective tissue that surround and support the kidney. You have the renal fascia. In the renal fascia, you can see there anteriorly and posteriorly. It's a dense fibrous connective tissue that anchors both the kidney and the adrenal gland in place. On the posterior wall, the renal fascia blends into the deep fascia around the posterior muscles. And on the anterior face of the kidney, the renal fascia adheres to the peritoneum. The perirenal fat capsule is a layer of adipose tissue that surrounds the kidneys and cushions them and helps hold them in place. Some textbooks will use the term perinephric instead of perirenal. Perinephric fat capsule is the same thing as the perirenal fat capsule. The innermost layer of supporting connective tissue around the kidney is the fibrous capsule. The fibrous capsule looks like a sort of a saran wrap around the kidney, so it's a very thin layer that coats the organ of the kidney, and it's this fibrous capsule that you can see histologically when you're looking at cross-sections of the kidney, if you're looking at the edge. And this fibrous capsule helps protect the kidney from surrounding infections. So if you have an infection going on in the abdominal cavity or in other abdominal organs, the fibrous capsule provides some protection, keeping those bacteria from getting to the kidney. It is really important to keep the kidneys in place. If the kidneys drop, this condition is called nephroptosis, or sometimes just ptosis of the kidneys. It can be very, very painful. And what happens is that if the kidney falls, it can cause sort of a kinking in the ureter, so that urine can't flow through the ureter, out the ureter, to the bladder. This can cause fluid to accumulate in the kidney. If the kidney drops, it can also kink the blood vessels leading to the kidney, so that there's impaired blood flow and the tissue isn't getting the oxygen that it needs. There are the supportive tissue around the kidney helps keep the kidney in place. The peritoneum helps a bit. The collagenous fibers of the renal fascia help keep the kidney in place. And the perirenal fat capsule is also key for keeping the kidney in place. Nephroptosis is more often seen in very thin women. And if someone loses large quantities of weight, it can actually contribute to nephroptosis because they lose some of their perinephric fat as well. This condition can be treated surgically by basically taking the kidney that's dropped and hitching it up and sewing it to the peritoneum. Now, if you take the kidney and cut it open, this is roughly what you see. You've got an actual cadaver image here, and then kind of the cartoon version here to neaten things up and make things more clear. The kidney has a cortex and medulla arrangement, so you have the fibrous capsule surrounding it here. There's that little saran wrap-like tissue that I mentioned. The layer immediately deep to the fibrous capsule is the renal cortex. So just like with the brain, with the thymus, with the adrenal gland, the cortex is the rind, the outermost layer of the actual functional tissue. And same with the kidneys. Deep to the cortex, you have the medulla. So that's what you're seeing there. And in there. That's all medulla. The renal medulla consists of renal pyramids, and they're called pyramids because they're roughly triangular. And these renal pyramids are separated by extensions of cortical tissue called renal columns. So these are the renal columns in between the pyramids. You can see them here, like that. The renal pyramids are made of bundles of urine-collecting tubules and capillaries. Deep to the renal medulla, you have the renal pelvis, and that's this area. That acts like a funnel into the ureter. You have minor calyces and major calyces that collect urine from the renal pyramid. So the minor calyces, major calyces, and pelvis act like a set of funnels, one set inside the other, that guide urine to the ureter. So you can imagine you've got the ureter down here. You have a major calyx. Calyx is the singular form. Calyces, C-E-S, is the plural form. So you've got the ureter. You have a major calyx that funnels urine into the ureter, and then you have a number of minor calyces that funnel urine into the major calyx. So a set of nested funnels. This is just giving you another look at an actual dissected human kidney with the different parts of the kidney highlighted. And you can see you have the renal cortex and the renal columns around there. You have the renal medulla and the pyramids. You have the minor calyces cupping the bottom of each renal pyramid. You have the major calyces collecting urine from the minor calyces, and then leading into the renal pelvis and the ureter itself. If you put all of this together, you can trace the path of urine flowing through the kidney from the renal pyramid into the minor calyces, from the minor calyces to the major calyces, into the renal pelvis, and down into the ureter. And of course, from the ureter, that urine goes down to the bladder for storage until an appropriate time to evacuate. The calyces, the pelvis, and the ureter, they all contain smooth muscle that contracts to propel urine along. So it's not, gravity gives a bit of assistance to getting urine down to the bladder, but it's not just reliant on gravity. There's actual smooth muscle contractions that move urine through this pathway. One last segment of the gross anatomy of the kidneys that I want to discuss is renal blood flow. So blood comes into the kidneys through the renal artery. From the renal artery, blood passes through the renal pelvis and the medulla through the segmental arteries into the interlobar arteries, and eventually up to the renal cortex, where it passes through the arcuate arteries. The arcuate arteries are called the arcuate arteries because they arc through the renal cortex. Coming off of the arcuate artery, you have the cortical radiate arteries, and branching off from that. And blood coming from these cortical radiate arteries, they go straight into the glomerulus, which is the first point where urine starts to be made, where fluid from the blood gets pushed out of the knot of capillaries called the glomerulus in order to begin the process of making urine. Okay, as blood drains back out of the nephron, which we'll talk about in the next video, you have it passing through the cortical radiate vein. So the cortical radiate vein is this little bottle brush structure here in blue, of course, to indicate the veins, drains into arcuate veins and back through interlobar veins and into the renal vein, and then back out of the kidney at the hilum. If you take a look at the bottle brush of the cortical radiate arteries, because there's a bunch of them in the renal cortex, each of these little segments, each of these little side vessels coming off of the cortical radiate artery leads into the glomerulus. On both sides. So looking at the density of cortical radiate arteries in this single slice of the renal cortex gives you some indication of just how many glomeruli, and by extension how many nephrons, are located in the kidney, in just a single kidney. Okay, this is a quick tour through the gross anatomy of the kidney. We'll get more into the microscopic anatomy of the kidney when we talk about the anatomy of the nephron, the units of the kidney that actually produce urine. But after studying this video, you should be able to talk about where the kidneys are located and what it means to say they're retroperitoneal. You should be able to describe both the external and internal anatomy of the kidney and talk about the path of urine flow as well as the path of blood flow through the kidney.